So let me introduce Kyla. So just look at my notes, making sure I get everything down. So Kyla, we're so lucky to know her here at Utah Foster Care. She is our primary, everyday, ongoing, all the time contact with DCFS. So when we have questions or concerns or anything we need, we call Kyla, and she is wonderful. She is the Strengthening Families Program Administrator. She's been with DCFS since 2007. And I just found out she's also a Weber State grad. So those of you who, and we love that because purple is one of our color. And so we love Weber State because they share that purple with us. And I've been privileged to listen to her present before. And I learned so much, and she has a wonderful presentation style, great sense of humor. And a lot of foster parents have also said they appreciate her so much too. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kyla, and she's going to take us to 9:50. Thank you for being here, Kyla.
Hey, good morning, and thanks for having me, and welcome. I got to see some of you the last couple of days up at the Foster Cluster retreat, and that was wonderful. I'm going to figure out, we're going to say that technology is going to be my friend today, and I'm going to go ahead and present my screen about the whys of visitation. So let's start this as a slideshow. And someone let me know if you're not seeing my screen. Otherwise, I'm going to assume we are good to go. So first off, I just have kind of a fun question, and that's where we get to find the chat feature and do our little first audience participation part of the morning. And that is, what do you think is one of the top growing industries in the world right now? One of the top 10 fastest growing industries in the world. And why would that be relevant to where I'm starting my talk today at 9 a.m.? E-cars, video conferencing, tech, yeah, all of those are in there. AI, definitely. Communication, social media. Some great guesses, good conversation. All of these are in the top 10. App producers, yes. And app producers is a perfect segue to the one I'm talking about. One of the biggest apps going on in the world right now, it's a $5 billion international industry, is not sex trafficking. Thank goodness, not that one. It is growing, unfortunately, or we're getting more aware of it. Either way, it's not a great industry. We definitely don't want to be promoting that one.
So Kyla, real quick, there's a black square in the middle of the presentation, and
really?
I'm not sure what that is. Okay, yeah, it's gone now.
Okay.
Oh, is that it just moved?
It was the chat window. So I'm going to slide the chat window over here.
Okay.
No,
perfect.
Thank you. No black circles in the middle of my presentation. Okay. So the tech industry, one of the technologies that is growing is now I went too far. Goodness gracious. Oh wow, there we are. Hey, that is our genetic ancestry industry. So we are at about the $5 to $9 billion industry right now at 2023. It has almost doubled since 2019 and is projected to hit $15 billion a year. Why do you think that is the biggest industry, or one of the biggest industries going on in the world right now? Anybody on here done theirs, gotten all the way back? My family traces back to William Wallace. That's a big important thing that my aunt now has on her wall in her house. Yes, it is that it's that understanding of where we come from. One of the other fascinating things that has gone on with this industry growing is the amount of people who learn that their family tree is a little bit more like this than maybe they anticipated, right? There's a lot of people learning lots of very interesting things about how far they trace back, whether they have a William Wallace or a Genghis Khan connection, or whether or not they have some branches they never knew existed. The amount of people, I have a friend personally who found out that he had a brother he was unaware of. Let's see. Are we still seeing black things? I had another notice.
Trying to talk, and I'm not me. It's just on this. There, it's gone now.
Oh,
it's covering one of your trees.
So it is the chat box. So if I ask a question in chat, I'm not going to be able to see any answers.
Yeah, Yeah, and we'll try to let you know if there's something that comes up in chat.
Yeah, no, I think, okay, perfect. So I will keep asking my chat questions, and then Liz, you just get to be a bigger part of my presentation than you planned on. I apologize.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay, well, we're just gonna tag team this one. But yeah, I think that there's some curiosity in that. So interestingly enough, I stand before you a blonde, very pale woman, but when our family did that, turns out that my incredibly dark black eyes come from an entire like African arm of my family, which like was really, really, really surprising to everyone who's like, well, no, you're Eastern European like everyone else. So there are these moments where we learn these things that help us understand who we are. And like I said, we also find out things like there are branches to our tree that we didn't know, or that because we have, adoptions throughout our family, getting to understand those other pieces can be really, really exciting and important. And we even, as someone who was raised by my two biological parents, I like having that knowledge, right? And when we talk about visitation, we talk about connection, it really does belong in that same vein of being connected to where we came from. Even if where we came from wasn't ideal, being able to have that connection, to know who we are, to have those traditions, to have those feelings, to have that way in which our branches may branch off, it may change, and we don't know how these cases turn out. Sometimes we go back to that tree and we were just in foster care for that stability moment. I'm going to use a lot of analogies about trees. Anybody else in here raised on a family that had a farm? My grandpa raised fruit trees in his little urban farm in Holiday for years. Now they built like 4 really expensive houses on his little urban farm. But when I was a kid, there was a really cool stone fruit farm behind his house. Stone fruit and corn. Anybody else have that kind of tree analogy with me? Otherwise, we'll do a lot of explaining about splicing and grafting and how that really can help trees thrive. And I promise I will get to visitation. I'm just laying some groundwork, some roots, if you will, as to why we're going to talk about visitation. Okay, did I miss any comments? I'm scared to touch it. It's going to give me a black box of doom.
Just one person agreeing with you. They also grew up on a farm.
Perfect. Love it. Okay. Sorry, I'm such an interactive presenter. This is going to drive me nuts. Okay. All right, we're going to persevere. Okay. So we talk about removal. That really is kind of that uprooting or moving the branch, right? We know that we're avoiding it whenever possible. The DCFS recognizes that removals, even when necessary, do cause trauma. Routines, or even a lack of routine. So we talk about sometimes these kids that are coming from maybe a home where there wasn't a lot of structure. That's still a learned structure. Like the absence of routine is still a routine. And so sometimes just feeling like I have to do something differently. I joke often about like when I have to go and stay at my in-laws. Like that's a different routine. They are a different kind of family than mine. Mine, when we do a vacation, we're going to sleep in, we're going to get up and go later in the day, we're going to take our time getting ready. I have very active, wake up at 5 a.m., we're going to go for a run, and then we have reservations at 7 a.m. for breakfast. And it's a very different routine. Anytime you're expected to do something that you're not used to, that can be really difficult. There's a lot of confusion around removal, right? Especially when we talk about kids that are in an age where maybe there is relief, and relief comes with guilt. Or I'm confused because I like this, but should I like this? What about what I used to know? Sometimes I'm leaving behind my pets. I'm leaving behind my toys. I'm leaving behind my familiar surroundings. And as we try very hard to transition that, one of the nice things about visitation is it gives us a chance to have those moments where we're seeing those things that we are familiar with. And we're having that opportunity to ask those questions or not have that confusion. One of the number one things when they do research around how children feel post-removal is guilt. A lot of children take the fact that they came into foster care as a problem that they created. Like it's their fault that they had to be brought into foster care. And so what visitation gives them is an opportunity to see that their caregiver, their former caregivers, their home of origin is okay, that they're doing well, and that they're going to continue to have that contact. Any thoughts or questions on that so far when we talk about removal, or things that you have seen that you want to share? And I don't know, Liz, if you want to like let someone unmute, or if we're just going to tolerate a black box for a second.
Yeah, so this is because it's a webinar, we don't have the function for them to be able to talk. But if you want to pull up, if you're looking for comments and you want to take a time and just pull up that black box, I think that's fine.
Perfect. I wonder,
just put it down.
Or I wonder if we use the QA, if that does it. Oh, okay, interesting. So when we talk about infant removal, I like that. So we actually see it. So okay, so we're gonna hit both of these things. So you see it in kids as young as like 3 and 4. If they're able to sort of process responsibility, you can see that even really young kids feel like they did something wrong and made mommy or daddy or that caregiver go away. With infants, what you see is a little bit different, right? Because you're depending on how young, you're interrupting bonding and attachment before it's had a chance to really stick. The good news with bonding and attachment is once a healthy bond or attachment is formed, an infant can have that attachment with more than one person. So we think about cultures where when an infant is born, the entire female side of a family basically comes and helps raise that baby. That baby actually attaches to every one of those caregivers. So we see the trauma in infants if they have maybe been neglected for a few months prior to coming in and haven't had that healthy attachment. But at the time of, like, if they're removed at birth, we actually see that visits help them form healthy attachments both with the foster caregivers as well as with the biological family that is visiting. Great. Okay, perfect. So when we talk about, let's see, black box is gone, moving forward. So when we talk about the major findings of research, and they have been researching foster care visitation for, onwards of about 20 years. And what they really show through multiple studies, and I can give a list to Liz if anyone wants to like read the full academic study. The first piece of research is really that the first 90 days post a removal is crucial for that reunification period. What we tend to see is about 2/3 of all cases will be on a successful track, or we will know that they are not within that first 90-day window. And that's when we start seeing if families aren't visiting consistently in 90 days, if they don't have access to their children, if they're not feeling supported by the division, by the placement, if they're not getting the chance to engage in services in those first 90 days, it is less likely that they do later. That doesn't mean it never happens. And sometimes there's other circumstances. So maybe someone is incarcerated for those 90 days, so that's going to delay the things. Maybe you really do have someone who needs to spend a portion of that time in an active detox. So it's not saying that it's completely doomed, but what we do know is when we have quality contact and support in those first 90 days, that improves reunification outcomes. The second is that the frequent contact is the #1 predictor of successful reunification. And when we talk about frequent contact, that is really those supportive visits. It's that opportunity for not only the person who had their children removed, but also the children to share information about how things are going, where they're placed, that they're safe. When we talk about what families get from the first couple of visits is a sense of understanding that their child is okay. The removal is traumatic for the parent point of view because they really don't know where their child is going. And that worst case scenario that goes on in a brain when you don't know where your children are going or who will be taking care of them can lead to a lot of that anxiety And so these first few visits where they get that chance to meet you, to see that their kids are coming and showing up clean and fed and cared for, really is a huge opportunity to kind of build that relationship and decrease that anxiety in hopes that they really can engage in those reunification-based services. And then for the children, there's some really great research saying that consistent contact with the family of origin or birth family, or there's a lot of different words going around right now for how you describe that, but from the people they were removed from, is linked to decreased depression and a decrease in externalizing of problem behavior. So that means long-term, when kids have consistent contact, and it's not just with the primary caregiver. So maybe the primary caregiver isn't in a place to have consistent visits, but was there a relative that we can still have contact with? One of the things when we talk about parent visits is it's important for the parent, but sometimes the parent can't visit. And how do we also have familial connections for these kids, especially if siblings are being split, so that they have that sense of identity, right? Those roots and those pieces about the tree in which we spend $5 billion a year researching our ancestry, right? Like that connection to other people, even if that primary caregiver, say like in my example, the incarcerated parent, is there a relative that this child has an extended relationship with that they could have some contact with to help keep that sense of identity? And I noticed a comment popped up. Let's see. Yes, yes, Anna. And this is a great reason when we talk about kinship. And I want to kind of challenge kinship thinking. Kinship placements are amazing, and we love when we can place with kin. That doesn't mean that kin stops there. And I think that that's the perfect reminder while we're talking about this on the slide, is that kinship is so much more than someone who can maybe become a kin adoption placement. Kin can be natural respite for you as a foster parent. You know, grandparents, aunts, uncles, maybe that aren't in a position to take a child in full time, but could still, like, you know, if they spend one weekend a month at grandma's house, let's explore whether or not that's something that they can continue to do. That normalcy, that sense of routine and that relationship can also be a natural support for you as the foster parent and help the child still feel connected. Let's see, what other beautiful comment did we get here? Yes, and I think that that happens a lot, that maybe the family isn't in a place, like the parents themselves are in a place to appreciate what you're doing right now. There's a lot going on when it comes to a kid having to be removed. Like that is the last step in a long train, right? And so a lot of times the parents are not maybe in a place to have that relationship with you just yet. What I've seen in my 17 years here is that even some of those parents who aren't ready in the moment, over time can get there. But I love looking at that relationship that you can have with, like in this example, you're saying the grandfather. I think that extended family is an excellent opportunity to still have kids have that healthy connection with their family of origin without necessarily having to feel like I think you used the word failure, and I think that can be really hard to take on when maybe the first family is just not ready to build that relationship. Yeah. Oh, and I love Jennifer that, yeah, you're kind of responding to Emily that they do feel responsible, and they need to take care of each other. And one of the things that we also realize with kids is that sometimes these visits help children who have felt like a caretaker to their parents. I use an example from when I was a caseworker, and it's for a long time. These boys are now young men, and one of them's married, but they were 10 and 12 when I had them, and they were actually with a kinship placement and had gone to Disney World. And the kinship placement called me really kind of frustrated because they're like, I just feel like they're being ungrateful. Every time we're here, all they keep bringing up is, well, my dad made a better rack of lamb than this one, or comparing a lot of their activity. And we had to kind of sit and process through what was going on for those boys. Those boys were really bonded, almost more like caretakers of their dad or peers than they were. I mean, their dad had some significant struggles, and for years they had kind of been these three musketeers. They even used that term. And they were feeling really guilty to be having this awesome, fun Disney World adventure without him there. And so finding the things that, and he really was a good chef. He used to bring snacks to visits that smelled like I was in a 5-star restaurant. So I was like, wow. So that was their way of bringing him with them to that adventure that he didn't get to be on. So sometimes these visitations or these contacts is an opportunity for these kids to see that the person, that adult that they've kind of been caretaking is doing okay as well. So I think that that's a really great point. I appreciate you adding that. All right. So I'm hoping technology's on my side and you all can hear this. So I'm going to play this. This is the lovely Natalie Clark. She just recently was on my team up until about a month ago. She is now back getting her master's degree and working for a nonprofit. She's going to talk a little bit from her perspective, especially for the older kids in care, about the importance of parent-child time. And somebody, Liz, just be ready to tell me if you can't hear it.
Hi y'all, my name is Natalie and I spent 6 years in Utah's foster care system. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about why visiting time is so important for us that are in the foster care system. What is contact? What is visits? Contact and visits are anything that give us that one-on-one quality time with our family or caregivers of origin. So sometimes when you have youth go on visits with their family of origin, you may experience some behaviors coming up. There may be some upsets after that visit, some emotionally charged situations that you just don't really know how to navigate or why they're happening. And I just kind of want to explain to you why those are coming up and that they are normal and they're okay to be happening. When a young person enters the foster care system, they are separated from everything they know and are comfortable with. And when we get a chance to be back into the environment that we are comfortable with and we know, we kind of get a sense of reminder of, oh, I'm loved, this is someone who knows me, this is where I feel comfortable. But of course, there comes a time when that visit ends, and that is going to trigger some emotions. That's going to bring up some reactions that may kind of surprise you and may make you wonder, should I stop these visits? I would really like to stress to you the importance of continuing visits. These behaviors are normal and are to be expected. This is the young person experiencing the loss and the grief from being disconnected from our social support system. But that grief and that loss is lessened very much by the ability to still stay connected. It's important to remember that the grief and the loss that the young person is experiencing after the end of that visit is much less than the grief and loss that we experience when we don't get any of that one-on-one contact time. When you have a young adult, maybe even especially a teen, that goes for long periods disconnected from a parent or a family member, sometimes it can feel like we've become strangers from those who are supposed to know us best. The importance of keeping those connections with our young people is vital. After leaving foster care, we still need a support network. We still want to know our parents, and we still want them to know who we are. So please remember the importance.
I'm assuming everyone could hear Natalie's message, and I'm just curious on some thoughts on that. How many of you guys have had older youth and those experiences? Okay, some great comments. Let's see. Excellent. Okay. So Lane, I completely agree, especially, there's a lot of mixed emotion about foster care. Oh,
Hi, all.
I mean, start her again. There is quite a lot of mixed emotion when it comes to visits. Oh, and Amy, you hit on a really good point, right? Because what happens when when the family isn't as responsive. And I think that that is actually Les's section later today, so I don't want to steal a ton of thunder. But I do think that's one of those times when we kind of explore, is there others? Are there other connections from their family of origin, their social support network that is more reliable, right? That connection to belonging is so important. And sometimes we get a little bit myopic in it's either the parents coming or not, but is there a supportive relative? What we see a lot when we do explore kinship placements is we do talk to relatives that are invested who just might not be in a position to be a placement, that could be that connection and could be that opportunity to still have, like Natalie was talking about, that connection to their life of origin without the kind of risk of being ghosted over and over, because I do think that is very real. And yeah, no, you guys have some great comments in here. I love the emphasis on that attachment or that identity piece. Oh, the $1 million question. When do you know if a bio family member's relationship is actually in the child's best interest? And I think that that is something that you probably do need a whole team approach for exploring, and really looking at what does that mean and what kind of contact. Because the other thing I love that Natalie said is kind of those any kind of contacts. So a lot of times when we talk about visitation and connection, we talk really formal about that, you know, coming to the DCFS office or those formal weekend visits. But what are those other kinds of connections that can be supportive and helpful? One of the attachments I'll give Liz to put into the training folder is some things about virtual contact and phone calls and how to set up even young kids to have these positive interactions, looking for those opportunities on FaceTime to sit and read the same book together or connect differently. So maybe it's not just those formal visits, but that other sense of connection. You know, we talk a lot about that opportunity to come to natural events. So is the child participating in a sport or those medical events or a school appointment? Some of those natural opportunities where someone from their family of origin could attend. What we know about visits when they go well, when you are able to make that connection between the first family and the placement family, is that children don't feel as torn. When we talk about kids, especially from about 4 to about 11, what you see is kids often feeling like they have to choose their favorite home. This aligns really much in foster care, very similar to what it does in kind of contentious divorce situations where children feel like they feel guilty for enjoying the things going on in their foster home, or they feel guilty for wanting to be in their home of origin. And when those visits really are supportive, and when the adults in those visits can make it okay that a child enjoys both homes, we see a lot less anxiety. You see a lot less behaviors. And a child realizing that it really does take a village to grow up and that it's okay to like both. It's not doesn't have to be that either or. Anxiety is lessened, and we're talking all the way around. So when you have that good relationship, when there's that trust between the foster family and the biological family, which I know cannot always be, like I have lived here for 17 years. I know it doesn't always work out really well, but when we see those relationships and that bond happen, you see the anxiety level of everybody, including the foster parents, go down because there's that open communication. You're feeling that connection, and we're looking for what is that long-term way that splice to that branch, that supportive graft is going to help this family be stronger. Because if the children do go home, what we see with those relationships that form during visitation is that often those relationships follow those children home. And these families, well, one of the number one predictors for coming into child welfare services is a lack of positive social connections within the first family or the biological family. When families don't have a strong support system, that's when we start to see some of that breakdown. That's when we start to see some of that substance use or that inappropriate coping. And so what we see a ton of successes is when we have these relationships build in a way that they become a long-term support for some of these young parents who maybe don't have those positive social connections. And then we see long-term outcomes becoming less contentious. Even in the instance that reunification is unsuccessful, when we have those relationships documented between the foster family and the first family, when they need to relinquish, we see less things go to trial. We see more more amicable resolutions to the child welfare matter. Okay, let's see. We got lots of good comments. Okay. So the aged out children and ongoing detrimental safety concerns, that one is incredibly interesting. Research shows that most of our aged out foster kids, about 70%, do wind up going back to their family, whether their family has made any positive change or not. And so really looking at what are we doing proactively to kind of reinstate those relationships. So this is where all of the work around sort of reinstating parental rights for youth aging out of foster care, or some of the conversations about how do you reintroduce family that maybe they have been estranged from for years in foster care, and doing that before they're a legally free adult. Sometimes that's just not possible, but we're really trying to switch that lens there, especially as the research continues to show that those children or those young people do wind up going back to that family. And so how do you help build boundaries and better relationships, or help the youth understand why there needs to be boundaries in relationships before they are in fact aged out of the system? But we do, I mean, that is an unfortunate thing we do see sometimes. Let's see. So what we see about the infants is that the bonding is vital for not only the child, but it's very vital for the actual parent. So on a sad statistic, for women who have a child removed at birth for substance use, they are about 65% of them will have another child within the next calendar year. If they immediately have the child removed and relinquish their rights. If they are offered services, even if they don't successfully get a reunification, they do not have another fetally exposed baby. It drops from about 65% down to about 15%. So one of the reasons that it's incredibly vital that that bond and attachment happens, even if they aren't able to be successful in reunification, is that we really are seeing that without that, we tend to have more and more children born to that fetal exposure. So we're really trying to stop a cycle, as well as if you aren't bonded and attached, if you see someone who doesn't come visit an infant at all within those first 90 days, they almost never come back to bond to that child or come back to engage in any kind of service. So that bonding and attachment is really, really vital from the parent perspective, as well as for that infant, because if the infant doesn't have an attachment to that adult, to that caregiver, and then they are reunified, you see a little bit of that loss of that secure attachment. So ideally, the visitation schedule between the infant is so that they are healthily attached to the placement, as well as to the biological parent, so that in the case of a reunification, that healthy attachment can transfer. So Sarah, I love this question. I would say this is where you're going to talk to your RFC and you're going to talk to your caseworker and you're going to advocate and say, look, who else has a relationship with this child? If the child's old enough to tell you about, when you're getting to know them and they're telling you about how they used to spend summers at Aunt Jenny's house, or the cousins they used to play with, or whatever those pieces are, as you start to hear about these relationships that matter to these children, that is a great time to bring that up to the caseworker. Say, hey, is there a way that they can have some contact with, this aunt and these cousins, or this grandmother? We are definitely doing all this training along with our workers to talk about kin connections and the importance of thinking about kinship beyond placement. But definitely feel like you have a voice to advocate for that yourself, for the children that are placed with you in those relationships. Oh, I love that. Love that. Like, invited dad to a foster daughter's Christmas dance recital. That was before you didn't want to, you weren't comfortable with him necessarily coming to your home, but it was an event that he could come to and be part of. I love that. Those natural times, those things, those milestones, those recitals, those pieces that matter. It's really interesting, even with my own children, talking to them as adults now, how much like dad not coming to something left an impact. And so sometimes that's going to leave an impact whether or not dad or mom was even invited. So thinking about what are those moments that they may really want them there. Oh, I love that. If both sides are willing, is there a place for bio and adoptive parents and the child to participate in therapy together? So there actually is a couple of models for that. One of my absolute favorite for younger kids is biobehavioral attachment catch-up. No, attachment biobehavioral catch-up, ABC. CPP does some of that work as well. Child parent psychotherapy, the Children's Center offers some of those things. And I think that is really spectacular. Whether or not you're moving towards reunification or adoption, I think having children not feel like they led to a side winning. Winning is the wrong word, but sometimes that's how it feels to a child. That opportunity to really have that attachment both ways is huge in some of that long-term mental health. I love that, Britt. Oh, and I love that you guys are sharing these like real life experience stories. Family, kind of coming back to that family tree analogy, I think when we really think about those different shapes and those branches and truly being able to look at how these relationships might be different. And so she got to see her, Lane still gets to see the granddaughter, and this adoptive family becomes part of your family and that family tree and those branches. I think that's huge when we think about kind of that it takes a village, and especially for kids who have these extended relationships, how do we keep those? I think that's fantastic. All right. Oh, and I love some great examples, compliments. Thank you for sharing those, Cindy. I think those are really good, tangible ways, acknowledging the trauma, complimenting about what they're doing well with their kids, asking for advice. Like, that is such a great tool when you think about just a way to validate a parent is literally just asking them, hey, when your child's upset, what has worked to comfort them? What's their comfort food? What are those things that you've got? What are their favorite, joke or game to play? Some of those things that just kind of value that they do know their children. For the most part, kids who do get removed do still come from a home where there was love and attachment and there was positive. And so being able to really talk about what did work, and valuing them as a parent is amazing. So suggestions about visitation directly after adoption. My suggestion is that this gets talked about long before the adoption gets finalized. So child welfare proceedings are anything but fast, right? Like, it is a process, it is a journey, and there are a ton of hearings. when we start moving towards the parents are either going to relinquish or we're headed to trial, that's really when we need to be making sure that those conversations about what that's going to look like afterwards. I think a lot of time that tone is set between the termination of rights and prior to the adoption date. And what does that relationship look like? And I think that's another place where that extended family is going to be really, really important, because it might be too raw for the parent themselves as they've just gone through a termination trial or they've just voluntarily relinquished. We might need to be looking at who else can be in part of these visits. What does that look like? And then be really realistic and honest about what that long-term contact is going to be. And I think the more clear we are with expectations of what would change that long-term contact, like if you're saying, yes, under these circumstances, being very clear about what those circumstances are, is going to help with that in the long term. I think if we've already gotten to the adoption, we're behind schedule on figuring those pieces out. All right. Oh, okay. So the other thing I just wanted to hit on really quick, and then we'll go back to the comments because you guys are engaged so beautifully. I cannot thank you enough. I can tell you how many times I do a training where I want a chat going and there's like 2 comments. So you are making my morning. Really what we're talking about, and I think this dovetails nicely into the examples that you guys have been given, is that we're modeling that communication and shared support. When children are learning healthy communication and healthy relationship skills between the adults they care about in their life, that is huge. Modeled behavior is one of the best ways to help a child learn how to be as an adult. So that is a great, incredible opportunity. And the way that you guys are talking about some of the ways that you do that is more powerful than any parenting class. In fact, it's as powerful as therapy. When we talk about what modeling offers, you see those impacts of when kids see behavior of healthy adults, that is super impactful. Provides the child with a chance to relieve worries about what's going on with their parent. We talked about that a little bit. And then that emotional intelligence, that ability to kind of connect in really difficult situations. And we know, and I honor, and I am so lucky to get to work with all of you and through the foundation every day. We're asking for this super high tip of the iceberg Maslowian emotional intelligence in being able to be in one of the most emotionally wrought, difficult situations and be compassionate and be leaned in and be there emotionally for children and for their families, and having that, like, looking for those opportunities for connection. And so just that appreciation of showing that emotional intelligence, and again, modeling that for the children you are with is huge, and will be that, again, that graph that really grows strong roots and strong branches in this family tree, regardless of outcome. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is this beautiful tree. So there is a professor in the Northeast who decided it was his mission to preserve all of these ancient stone fruits that were starting to become extinct. You know, fruits could go extinct, but that's what I learned. And so he has actually gone out and collected 40 different types of stone fruits and have grafted them all to one tree. And these grafts come in, you know, they're bound. It's like a little mini greenhouse wrapped around this branch. And each one of these branches then grows and splices from there. And it creates this beautiful, multi-blooming, multi-impact situation. And I want, as a visual, because I'm a huge visual person, to think about that's really the impact you're having when you're having these healthy interventions, being a healthy foster parent, having these impactful visitation, supporting the family, modeling these pieces. That's really grafting your family, your family's culture, your support to the tree. And whether that is for a short period of time and you helped that branch grow for a few months or a year, or if that's a permanent graft and that tree, you know, that is a branch of your family tree forever through adoption, you have strengthened and improved what's going on for that child and their roots and their branches moving forward. And that long impact, I think, is just beautiful. It's an art that we ask you to do, that art of support and understanding and compassion. And we just appreciate every one of you showing up to do that. And let's see. Oh, yes, I should be reading the comment completely aloud. I agree with that. Okay, so read aloud the comments you're responding to. Not all the comments are showing up for us. I'm sorry. Danny, that's great. I will do that. Yeah, a private place where you're sharing photos and stories about the kids for the family. I love that. So one of the important tasks in having a child enter my home is to create safety. In situations where the parents aren't safe yet or not wanting information talked about, visits can be placed where parents are telling children what to say and what not to say. I always encourage my children to have a voice, but this scenario can create challenges and barriers that need to be worked on. Absolutely. And I think that is where if we're concerned that the visits aren't safe and that they are being coached, that is where we look at supervised contact. That's where those therapeutic contacts need to come in. Recognizing that maybe the parents aren't in the right headspace. And so how do we give them that opportunity? How do we include extended family in those visits? How do we make sure that the visit is about the visit and not about the coaching? But Denise, I do recognize that, and I would highly encourage, if that's going on, to explore alternative ways of having contact, but not to terminate contact. And so we did have to establish rules about boundaries for being respectful to each other and not sharing pics or information on public social media. Highly encourage that as well, that we want to, have that mutual respect and boundaries. That's something that the team should also be able to help create and help you support. Well, and we've got some adopted kids together with siblings that they had never met before. The parent is in prison, so we are working on relationships and siblings. And I think that's sometimes there are going to be those situations. Like I said, I even have a friend who's through their 23andMe found out about a sibling they didn't know about, and they're in their mid-40s building that relationship. But it's been interesting to watch how impactful even building that relationship in midlife, if we will. And hopefully I didn't insult anybody else who's in their 40s, but where we are in our 40s, even that was super impactful for him to meet this sibling. I think that there's some definite emotional ties there. And I am at time, and I know I've got another 20 great comments in here, and I just appreciate so much your participation and questions and comments. And I'm sorry that a little black box showed up every time I opened the comment section, but please take my information from Liz. Feel free to reach out anytime, and just appreciate everything that you guys do. And if nothing else, you have a beautiful picture of a 40 different fruit tree.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Kyla, so much. I went, as you were presenting, I'm thinking, see, I told you she was good. So just absolutely always learn from you so much. And and just so you guys know, Kyla's kind of a little bit behind the scenes in a way, but she's working and doing so much good. So just know there are these amazing folks like Kyla who are working so hard with DCFS to try to do this child welfare thing the very best we can. So thank you, Kyla.